We're in the battle, but the sound of the Lord's victory is echoing from heaven and from the new heaven and the new earth, and we can hear the sound. It's faintly, but it's drawing us to itself. That glory is almost here, that life is almost here, that the new heaven and the new earth are almost here.
Pastor Brian Wolf-Miller speaking at the 2026 Issues Etc. Making the Case Conference.
And when the fight is fierce and the warfare long, steals on the ear that distant triumph song, and then hearts are brave and arms are strong.
For a contribution of $250 by Labor Day, we'll send you a link to watch an on-demand video stream and download audio recordings of all this year's conference, including Pastor Wolf-Miller's teaching on Christian courage. Learn more at issuesetc.org or call 618-223-8385.
After years of war, no one could stand between my men and home. Not even me.
That's a bit of the trailer from the movie The Odyssey. It is a $250 million film, and it opens today, trying to tell a very old and really a very complex story of the journeys of Odysseus from Troy, where he had been at war for 10 years, to home. Well, the way Homer tells it, takes him another 10 years to get home. Welcome back to Issues Etc. Joining us to review the movie, The Odyssey, Pastor Ted Giese. He has a bachelor's degree in fine arts. He's vice president-elect of the Lutheran Church Canada. He's pastor of Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, and he teaches a course for Concordia Lutheran Theological Seminary titled A Lutheran Approach to Art, Media, and Film. Ted, welcome back.
Thanks, Todd.
Congratulations on your election to first vice president of Lutheran Church Canada.
Oh, thank you. And actually, it's only vice president, so there's no second, third, fourth, or fifth. It's just me. Thank you very much, Todd. And that starts officially in September, so looking forward to that.
This movie could very easily bite off more than it can chew because The Odyssey is, as it has been proverbially become, it's a big story. And it's picking up on another big story. And it kind of starts in the middle. I mean, the Homer's Odyssey does. It kind of starts in the middle. Does this movie from this famous director do the job? Does it tell the whole story?
No, I don't think that's what he was trying to do. And I also don't think that this is the medium to do it in. Like I just, in advance of watching the film, so I went and saw it last night. In advance of watching the film, I did go back through the Odyssey, the whole play, like the epic poem of Homer. And in doing that, I listened to the audio version of the book that you can get. There are a bunch of different translations of it, and the one that I listened to was the Robert Fagles 1996 translation that had Ian McKellen doing the audiobook narration of the whole thing. That's like, I don't know, it was like 15 hours or something. So even though you've got just under 3-hour version of the poem, the epic poem by Nolan, that's going to leave a lot out. It just has to, right? And like there was a 90s kind of television miniseries that had more of it in there. And even along the way here, just in order to prep and get myself ready for everything, I went back and we watched the Wolfgang Petersen 2004 Troy movie with Brad Pitt as Achilles in it and Eric Bana as Hector. That's its own kind of a thing. It's a slice of the pie of all of this. But one of the reasons I went and looked at it is that it on the online discourse on places like X and Facebook, there was a lot of memes and things that were drawing comparisons between that film and what they were expecting to find in Christopher Nolan's film. So I thought, well, I should go back and take a look at that because people are saying, well, this is so faithful. And I remembered it not being particularly faithful in a couple major ways. And again, some of the reasons why it's not going to be faithful is when they're making adaptations, they're choosing what parts to put in and what parts not to put in. Some of it is a choice because of what they think about the original text. Some of it probably is a choice based on like how much runtime can we do? Like how much can our budget absorb? Like how big does our budget have to be? This is a $250 million reported budget. Oftentimes you have to spend almost that much again in advertising. And maybe Nolan has found a little bit of a jailbreaker way around that with what he's up to. But there's a lot of money, and you have to figure out how to use that money, and you have to figure out how to tell the story within that budget. I also watched, to get myself ready, there was a kind of a really great version of a portion of the story. And this was more recent, from 2024, The Return. So this is a movie featuring Ralph Fiennes as Odysseus and Juliette Binoche as Penelope. And it really just focuses on like that portion of the epic poem where Odysseus has returned home. And he shows up as kind of a beggar by himself and has to deal with all of these suitors who are trying to finagle their way in on his throne in Ithaca. And you're going to find lots of different versions of this. You could go watch the Coen brothers, O Brother, Where Art Thou?, which is a updated version set in the Depression era South of the United States, which is much more comical and is not going to be 3 hours long. And it's certainly not going to be 15 hours long. So there's different ways to come in contact with all of this, but each different iteration of it that you run into is trying to tackle the question of how do they make the adaptation? So we've talked about adaptations many times before on Issues, Etc. And I think it's something that listeners are very interested in because, and I've observed on this, is that confessional Lutherans are interested in fidelity. Is it faithful to the text? And part of that is that our desire for preaching and teaching and any kind of media that would come out of looking at the biblical text, we want that stuff to be extraordinarily faithful and as faithful as we possibly can have it be. And then that desire spills the banks and floods out onto other things, even onto things like Homer's Odyssey. So then that's why the question would come, is this a faithful adaptation? And not everybody shares that concern. Some people are not necessarily as concerned with fidelity to original text as we as confessional Lutherans are.
What part of the story does it end up telling?
Well, it tells quite a bit. There are certain islands and certain portions of it that, get knocked out. A lot of the things that aren't there are the certain gods aren't there. They might mention Poseidon or mention Zeus. They mention like Zeus's law, which is kind of a version of the golden rule, which is about hospitality. And, like that stuff's mentioned, but in Homer's Odyssey, like their characters in it, like they are actually super involved. So for instance, in the epic poem, he spends 7 years by himself on this island with Calypso, who is in this particular film played by Charlize Theron. So here you've got Matt Damon as Odysseus trapped for 7 years on this island, and he's eating the lotus flowers that help him kind of forget his past, and he's not really engaging with it. In the play, in like Homer's big epic poem, it's Zeus who, because Athena his daughter has begged him, Zeus sends Hermes to tell Calypso, you have to let this man go. He's gone through enough, And then there's this kind of like battling between Zeus and Poseidon as to how much suffering Odysseus is going to have to go through before he returns. So there's aspects of the story that aren't there. And it's the kind of the way that the gods show up in the original text versus how Nolan incorporates them into the film. And that's a major difference, that's stuff that isn't there when you're going through the film. And Nolan has his own personal opinions, apparently, and they kind of show up as the film unfolds in kind of a couple different particular ways. But you do get a kind of a returning back to the things that happened at Troy. And part of that is that his Odyssey is not just a Odyssey in physical travel, or even an Odyssey in the endurance of time to get there, because it's not actually as long a journey as it takes him to get there. But for Odysseus, it's also an internal journey. Like, this is the way Nolan puts it together, is that there's a psychological journey that deals with grief and post-traumatic stress from experiences in the war. And he's wondering, or he's asking the question, what would be keeping Odysseus from returning home? Because Odysseus, on the one hand, wants to return home, but on the other hand, it's taking forever. And why is that? Like, the gods are involved in it, in theory. That's a perception. But then, is there something in Odysseus himself that's causing him not to return home? And Nolan has an answer for that, and he includes that in the film.
So does he get us all the way back to Odysseus' home, his battle with these suitors, his reunification with his son and his wife and father?
Yeah, I mean, the film sets everything up with that scenario, right? So it starts like that, and then it ends like that. So there is the return home of the father, and the father sets everything right. That's a big part of the story. Odysseus himself, particularly in Homer's poem, is he's a trickster. He's witty. He's kind of enjoys the craftiness, and being one step ahead of everybody. And you get maybe a little less of him reveling in that from this Matt Damon, but you do get him having to kind of work his way through all of these misadventures and adventures to get to his return back to his home. And the return home is where he doesn't come with a ship full of men. All of them are gone. It's just him as he returns, and he presents himself as a beggar in order to kind of infiltrate the whole situation, because he has to use some subterfuge to win the day. But there is a sense of self-sacrifice in the character of Odysseus when you get to that particular point. He is not a entirely noble character as we would count a heroic noble character from a Christian point of view, but he's definitely a more complicated character. He would fit better, let's say, in the book of Judges than he would fit elsewhere in Scripture.
Pastor Ted Giese is our guest. We're reviewing the movie The Odyssey. We will talk about how the director has primed the audience at the beginning of the film. Then we'll spend some time with Nanso Mogor discussing artificial intelligence.
Truth-centered, mission outreach. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
St. Paul appealed to the Corinthians that all of you agree and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in the same mind and in the same judgment. Unity and variety, united in mind and judgment, these all can be thorny topics among us, as they have been for Christians since the church's earliest days. The June-July issue of the Lutheran Witness takes up these very topics. Pick up your copy at cph.org/witness or visit witness.lcms.org to learn more. The Lutheran Witness, helping you interpret the world from a Lutheran perspective.
Birds sing, cows moo, thunderstorms wake you from a deep sleep, but for many, they can't hear it. They're deaf, living in a world of total silence. The Epitha Lutheran Mission Society for Deaf Ministry is the only recognized service organization in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod devoted exclusively to the deaf and hard of hearing. Their mission is to bring the gospel message of Jesus' love and saving grace to those who are deaf. Learn more at elms-deaf.org.
Lutheran Church Missouri Synod chaplains provide word and sacrament ministry to our military personnel and their families. For information on their service, visit lcms.org/armed forces, lcms.org/armed forces. We are reviewing the movie The Odyssey with Pastor Ted Giese. He teaches a course for Concordia Lutheran Theological Seminary called A Lutheran Approach to Art, Media, and Film. Ted, you say that the director Nolan primes the audience a little bit at the beginning of the film with a card that simply reads, "In a time of apparent magic."
So this is interesting. Like when we got out of the theater and we got home, I asked Michelle, my wife, I said, hey, did that thing at the beginning, did it say in a time of apparent magic, or did it say a time of apparent magic? I wasn't sure. And then she said, I didn't even notice that. So some people are not going to, they might just skip right past this. But Christopher Nolan is particularly, this is important for lots of movies. Like if you're just watching movies, watch what happens in the first 5 minutes, because often that'll kind of tell you where everything's going, what's going to happen, etc. So here he's got this line, in a time of apparent magic. And the word apparent there is doing a lot of heavy lifting. So you, as a viewer, see that. And if you're paying attention and thinking about it, for me, it helped kind of frame, where are we going with this? So as everything starts to unfold, I start to say to myself, oh, I see what's going on. I don't think that he necessarily, he's got himself a challenge. He's got Homer's epic poem that includes gods and it includes monsters and it includes magic. And it's what do you do with all that stuff? The modernist point of view is that none of that stuff is plausible or possible. So there have to be other answers for it. A postmodern point of view might be something like, well, there's truth, and then there's the truth of the characters, and then there's also the truth of the people watching or observing, and also the truth of the person who produces it, who makes the film itself, let's say, in this case with film. So that kind of word, an apparent time of magic, means that maybe it isn't actually a time of magic. It's only that that's the way that they perceive it, or the way that it is, the way the story is told. And, we've got Hades and we've got shades in the Asphodel Meadows. We've got all of these kinds of things that are all part of the story. The question is, are they just simply embellishments? Do the characters believe them? Do people watching the show, at what level is their suspension of disbelief? Do they take all of that to heart? And then also, what does Christopher Nolan think of it? And I think that's part of the tell. It's him saying, I don't actually believe in any of that stuff, but I'm trying to tell you a story. So for me, as I look at it, I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is a very cerebral director. People who've watched his films know that he's like this. He's doing a lot of deep thinking on things. And are people going to come along with him on this deep thinking, or aren't they? Does he even really care? Maybe not 100% sure. So, as an audience member, it gives you, for some people, it gives them the, okay, I can be off the hook on this. I don't have to take any of the supernatural stuff too seriously, because the director doesn't take it that seriously either. But the next thought is, what does he take seriously? And what is going on with this? Because in a way, I think the movie itself, I wouldn't put this past him. It seems this is the case. You just did this Oppenheimer movie. You've done all sorts of things. You did Batman movies. You did a movie, the historical thing about Dunkirk. And then you choose this. So why is it that you're choosing this? And within the story itself, you have the Trojan horse. And then you have to wonder, is the entire movie a Trojan horse? Is the audience the people of Troy? Is Nolan himself Odysseus? Are we all part of his Odyssey? This is a meta narrative where there's more going on than the actual thing you're looking at. I don't know, maybe Todd, I've watched too many movies. Maybe I've watched too many Christopher Nolan movies, but that's the spot I ended up in as I was watching the film. And I thought that that opening line was him tipping his hand to show us that this is what this is going to be.
How well does he draw an audience into this epic story if they're not already familiar? And I mean, given the state of education today, highly likely they are not already familiar with Homer's classic.
I wonder what this would be like for somebody who comes into it completely blind. I'm left thinking about it kind of like this. So over the last couple of Sundays, so last Sunday and this Sunday, we're in Matthew chapter 13, and we're looking at the parables of Jesus, particularly the parable of the sower, and then the parable of the wheat and the tares, they call it. So in there, at some point, the disciples ask, they say, hey, why do you teach them in parables? And Jesus says that some of them, their hearts have grown, he quotes Isaiah, their hearts have grown dull, that their eyes, they have shut, with their ears, they can barely hear. But then for other people, it's for like themselves, these disciples of Jesus, for them, it's revealed to them. And then Jesus actually tells them what the nature of these parables are actually about. So in some ways, I think that for Christopher Nolan, when he makes a movie like this, and particularly a film like this particular one with the Odyssey, for some people, it's just going to be a parable. It's going to be like a story that they sit down and they watch, and that's it. Maybe they get like some kind of moral from it, but any kind of deeper meaning from it, they're not going to get. So if you have like some homeschool kid doing a classical school curriculum, or if you're at like a literal classical school and you've actually dug into it and really done the work of looking at this particular ancient historic epic, then you're going to get a lot more out of this film probably. Now, it is an R-rated film. It's not for kids. It's not like in Canada, there are places where it's rated PG, PG-13 kind of a thing. But there's a couple of moments with some language and things like that going on in it. There are some pretty intense, violent moments along the way at spots. But, so I'm not saying that like grade 5 kids that are, reading Homer for their classical education should necessarily run out and watch this. But when they get around to watching it, they're going to have a lot more to bring into it than your average viewer. And I think that might help because I have my own personal things about the film that I'm not 100% happy with. Like Christopher Nolan has a particular style, and his style is it's getting more and more austere. And there's a kind of a way in which the film is sort of a little drab. The lighting is dim or dark in a lot of scenes. The set decoration, all the armor and stuff like that, it's like he doesn't really care about some of those things. That stuff is not really, there's a lot of minimalism going on with that. Homer himself spends a lot of time talking about the material culture of the world and the luxury items and the natural world and stuff. It's very rich. So you're not seeing that on the screen. That's the kind of stuff that often draws the audience in and gets them hooked into it. Now, you don't want to have all artifice and nothing behind it either, right? So, but for this, it's a very pared down presentation in a lot of ways. It's simplified. It doesn't look as lush or as wonderful looking as my imagination made it to be when I heard Ian McKellen just tell me about it just recently in the last couple of weeks.
So one of the things that I think you believe Nolan might have pulled a fast one in terms of its pre-promotion and one incident of transgender casting. What did he do there? What do you think he was up to?
Yeah, I do think that Nolan pulled a fast one on all of us. And this is, again, this feeds into my general thought of Christopher Nolan as Odysseus himself, kind of in the way that this is all unfolding. Do you remember this movie we talked about a couple of years ago now, I think? It was called Don't Look Up by Adam McKay.
Sure.
Yeah. So this one was all about climate change, and it like literally had Meryl Streep playing kind of a version of Donald Trump in it. And it had all of these famous actors like Leonardo DiCaprio, who is a big climate change, like environmentalist type guy. Jennifer Lawrence was in it. And, you know, this Adam McKay made this film with Will Ferrell. Will Ferrell was like a producer on it. And what we talked about, I don't know if you remember this part, but I thought that this movie was a goof, that Adam McKay sat down and said, okay, I need to make another movie. Like, how can I get money to make this movie? I'm going to make a movie about this topic. People are going to, like, progressive types and those, they're going to put money into it. So it's a way of getting the money as picking the right topic, the thing that's in the zeitgeist of the day. And then I'm going to put all these people in it, but there's a way in which it's an inside joke, because he picks somebody like Meryl Streep to play the president. Of course, like, you know, there's certain aspects of Hollywood that are going to want to see a woman president of the United States, right? So that plays into their desire to be a part of the project. And she probably has not, I don't know, but she probably doesn't like Donald Trump that much. So that is more of an allurement to get involved in the project. In the end, the whole thing seemed like a colossal, sniggering kind of inside joke that leveraged Hollywood against itself for him to make the film. And in a way, I think that it's very possible that Christopher Nolan might just not actually care about many of the kind of things that are the concern of Hollywood, but Hollywood, like the Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences, has the nominations for the Oscars and runs the Oscars. They have made their changes to what makes you eligible for Oscars, and they've put certain things in. So the transgender related stuff or any LGBTQ related stuff, certain kind of diversity casting, all of that kind of stuff makes your film more eligible than other films in order to be eligible for awards. So, you know, he does all of that so that, like Christopher Nolan does, he does all of that so that he is A, eligible for the awards, but B, he kind of captures that part of the pop cultural zeitgeist, or the people that are into that kind of end of things, by putting certain actors into certain roles in his movie. It's all very visible. Now, the thing that I think the fast one that he's playing on everybody is that he knows the movie he made. Like, he's written it, he's cast it, he's shot it, he's been involved with the editing of it, he's put it all together. He knows what the final product is. So all of a sudden, Ellen Page, who goes by Elliot Page now, and who believes very much that they're a man, has been cast in the film. And the internet thought that this is the presupposition that right-wing, probably, or right-leaning commentators came to this expectation that Page was playing Achilles. As it turns out, Achilles isn't even in the movie at all. And Christopher Nolan knows that Achilles is not in the movie, but he just lets everybody out there kind of twist in the wind on this. And there are articles, and there are blog posts, and there are, endless videos that are made about, like, hand-wringing about how terrible this is, or how great this is, how wonderful this is, how tragic this is. And in the meantime, he is getting free publicity out of all of these people. The kind of free publicity you can't buy, right? So this, I think, is part of it. And the curious thing is, like, within the movie itself, and this gets back into that meta-narrative stuff, near the very beginning, Tom Holland, Telemachus, the son of Odysseus, he's kind of training in hand-to-hand combat. Like, there's sword fighting and he's training. And John Leguizamo is playing kind of like the faithful servant of Odysseus, who is the pig herder, the swine herder. And he's watching all of this happening. And of course, he's blind, so he's mostly listening. And he kind of thinks to himself, well, Telemachus, what you're doing wrong is you're parrying too quickly. You need to hold back and let your attackers attack you. And then in that, you can find out what their weaknesses are. You can kind of trick them into underestimating you, and then you can like succeed. So here you've got, like, in the blogosphere and the, YouTube world or whatever, you got all these people who are starting to second guess, like, well, is Christopher Nolan going to be able to make a good movie, or is it going to be a disaster? Or they're all befuddled by the whole thing. And then you've got all these people that are like all concerned and like worried about how it's all going to unfold. And in the meantime, he's doing that because he's not immediately defending himself. He's just holding back. He's doing the very thing his character's doing. And in the context of the film, Telemachus doing that at the beginning also foreshadows what his own father's going to do when Odysseus returns at the end of the film. So it's part of the narrative, but it seems like it's part of the meta narrative of what's going on too, which, by the way, means that Page is uniquely chosen for this. And this is where it gets even weirder, is that this character that Page plays, Sinon, is not in the Odyssey. The character's from the Aeneid, which is a Roman version of the Odyssey written by Virgil in Latin. So it's not in Greek, it's its own thing. And Virgil has created this character of Sinon, and Sinon within the Aeneid is very crafty, just like Odysseus, and is an expert liar and is in on it and is involved in tricking the Trojans to take the horse into the city. But in Nolan's film, that's not the way Sinon is. Sinon believes what Odysseus says to him as a character and is without guile. This is a very trusting, believing, loyal character that would never lie, and is the very opposite of what Virgil did with that character initially when it was first included in the Aeneid. That's a choice. Nolan is choosing to take that character and do the exact opposite with that character, and choosing to put it into the movie, and then choosing the actor to play the part that themselves outside of the movie is kind of playing a part too, and doing that to the Hollywood system and also to the audience that's in the middle of watching all of this. It's kind of fascinating, and I hope it doesn't get too deep in the weeds, dear listener, but there seems to be a there with this, and what to make of all of that in the end, and where we really see Nolan in all of that is, I think, a legitimate question to ask.
Pastor Ted Giese is our guest. We're reviewing the movie The Odyssey. We'll talk about the quality of the acting next.
This week on The Word of the Lord Endures Forever, we continue our walk through the Psalter, reflecting on Psalms 132 through 136. The Lord has chosen Zion. How good and pleasant it is. Our God is above all gods, the idols of the nations, and give thanks to the Lord. Join me, Pastor Will Whedon, for The Word of the Lord Endures Forever, your daily 15-minute verse-by-verse Bible study on demand. Listen at thewordendures.org or your favorite podcast provider.
Unity and variety can be a hot topic among Christians and Lutherans in particular, and the June-July issue of the Lutheran Witness takes this topic up with articles such as Unity and Variety Through the Ages by Richard Serena, Formed Together by Sean Dinzer, A Call to Faithful and Harmonious Variety in Worship, and much more. To get your copy, visit cph.org/witness or visit witness.lcms.org to learn more. The Lutheran Witness, helping you interpret the world from a Lutheran perspective.
Colorado Springs, gateway to the beauty of the Front Range and Pikes Peak, is the home of Shepherd of the Springs Lutheran Church. At Shepherd of the Springs, you will find the historic liturgy celebrated, our Lord's Word faithfully preached, and His holy body and blood distributed every Sunday at divine service. Information and service times can be found at sslc-cos.org. Shepherd of the Springs Lutheran Church, a proud sponsor of Issues, etc.
Lutherans for Life assists for-life Christians in offering the hope and help of the good news of Jesus Christ to women with an untimely pregnancy, women, men, and families suffering under the guilt of an abortion, young people with questions and concerns about sexuality, and the elderly and those with disabilities or terminal illnesses. Learn more about LFL resources and forming a life team or life chapter, or becoming a life advocate by calling 888-364-LIFE. That is 888-364-5433, or by visiting lutheransforlife.org.
Providing artillery support for the church militant on the front lines, you're listening to Issues, Etc.
Here's an easy way for you to help us contend for truth in an age of anti-truth. Subscribe to the Issues, Etc. podcast with YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Just type Issues, Etc. in the YouTube search engine and click subscribe. For Apple and Spotify, type Issues, Etc. in the search engine, hit follow, and leave us a 5-star review. Help us inform other podcast listeners by subscribing to the Issues, Etc. podcast with YouTube, Spotify, and Apple.
Real estate is the second largest ministry budget line, but many overlook its potential. Tom Campbell, Senior Vice President of Real Estate Solutions at LCEF, has spent over 30 years in commercial real estate. He's seen congregations and schools transform their properties into revenue-generating assets to serve the community. Visit interesttime.org/property for a Q&A on how LCEF helps ministries navigate real estate wisely.
Welcome back to Issues, Etc. We are viewing the movie The Odyssey with Pastor Ted Giese. I'm Todd Wilkin. So, Ted, how was the acting?
Some of it I really liked. Matt Damon is pretty good. There's a weird thing about Matt Damon in this. You've probably seen these memes, he's been in all these movies, and we've talked about some of them. We talked about The Martian. We haven't talked about Saving Private Ryan. But over and over again, he's in movies where he needs to be rescued or he needs to get home. So, when you see this, it's kind of like, wow, there's a lot of meta baggage that comes along with casting Matt Damon in this movie. But Matt Damon himself does a really good job. And it's not just like run of the mill Matt Damon. I think he does a really good job here. I think that a lot of people are sort of pretty happy with Anne Hathaway in it. I think she's a little overwrought. There's some pretty feminist overlays that have been added in that are not really part of the actual story at all. She's the one that's kind of defending the throne from all of the suitors, along with her son waiting for Odysseus to return. And there's this kind of moment where she's like, well, just because I'm a woman, I can't be the one to lead, kind of a thing, on the throne. That's an overlay, and it's kind of an overly wrought moment. It's not maybe her best acting at that spot. It's very dramatic, but it's not very good. John Leguizamo, as Eumaeus, he's very good. And that's a much bigger part than you'd think. When you get to characters like Robert Pattinson's Antinous, he's the main suitor who is trying to weasel his way onto the throne of Ithaca. He's odious and villainous and conniving and does a great job. There's like this actress, Mia Goth, who's kind of a horror film actress, and she was in Frankenstein. We talked about Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. She was in that. She has a very small role, only a couple of scenes. I think you could have done more with that character within the movie, although you don't want the movie to be longer than it already is. But she was particularly good as this duplicitous handmaiden of Penelope. They were good. And actually, I wasn't really looking forward to Charlize Theron in it, but she was better in that role of Calypso than I thought. And in fact, the one thing that I kind of was afterwards, in retrospect, I thought maybe she should have played Athena, and Zendaya, who plays Athena, should have played Calypso. So yeah, and actually, Athena is an interesting character. Do you want to like just dig into Athena for just a minute?
Sure.
Okay, so Athena is one of the, I'm using air quotes, gods, like one of the pagan gods that does show up through the course of the film. And, you know, she shows up often specifically with, actually, I think now that I think about it, she only ever shows up with Matt Damon's character of Odysseus. Now, there's a reason for that. As you're going through the film, there's a certain assumptions. He's playing on assumptions. So if you do know Homer's Odyssey, you think you know what this relationship between Athena and Odysseus is. And you're sort of thinking that that's what this is going to be. If you don't know anything at all, it doesn't really hurt in any particular way, but it does play on that if you know. And as you go through the film, you start to think, well, this is kind of a pared down, cut back version of Athena. Athena is definitely very active in the story as Homer presents it. And then there's this moment, and it's kind of like, in some ways, the sort of apex of the film. And I think this is the moment that really shows what Nolan thinks about all of this particularly. So the big siege of Troy is happening. They've tricked their way in. The gates have been opened. Menelaus and Agamemnon and all the troops come rushing in, and it's chaos. It's all chaos. And now at the foot of the statue of Athena, there's Odysseus. And Odysseus sees this young, we don't know if it's a slave girl or if it's a citizen of Troy, a Trojan of some sort, dragged up to the foot of the statue of Athena. And it is the actress Zendaya playing that character. And some of the soldiers, the Greek soldiers, cut her head off at the same time that the head of Athena, the statue of Athena, gets cut off. So what that tells you is that, or what it's conveying, and like maybe there's a little of ambiguity there, but what it's conveying to the audience is that all of those scenes that you saw with Odysseus and Athena through the whole course of the whole film, this is the rug pull moment. They were not actually Athena. That was part of him working through his grief and his, feelings of failure and his shame and everything, dealing with what happened as a result of his tricking the Trojans, which broke the social contract about hospitality and gift giving and everything in that ancient world. He played them all, and this was the result. So she's actually his guilt. And it's a psychological thing that's occurring through the course of the film. And she's not actually a goddess in the pagan Greco-Roman sense. And I don't know, like Zendaya is fine. She's not tearing up the screen, but that I think is one of the most interesting twists. And like, dear listeners, sorry, I've spoiled that. We should have said something that'd be spoilers. Like the Odyssey is like 3,000 years old. So I'm sorry if you haven't checked it all out just yet.
With just a few minutes here, any pastoral concerns?
Well, there's lots. I mean, I think that when you're watching a movie like this, or even if you're just engaged with the play. So the thing for me, like this Homer's epic poem, even if the movie turned out to be terrible, at least I had the opportunity to go back and look at that epic poem again, which was that was interesting. It was a fun experience to check that out again and refresh my memory. But when you look at like pagan literature or secular movies or media or other kinds of books or whatever you're looking at, there's something that you need to be careful about. Like, especially if you can, on the face of it, say, well, listen, this is not particularly Christian, right? You're going to bring with you your Christian beliefs, what you believe, teach, and confess as a Christian, to what you're looking at, and you need to actually do it. If you want to use, or just take that analogy that we've used a little bit, that's part of the film itself, with Telemachus learning how to fight, and like, it's a fight. So Christopher Nolan has certain ideas, and he's an opponent of yours in a way, and now you've entered into the fight with him as you sit in the theater, and you want to be on your toes. You don't want to get cut down in the midst of all of it. So my advice is to really pay attention, like, and look at it with your Christian worldview, because you know that this is not going to share your Christian worldview. Like, that's not what's going to happen. Like, Homer was not a Christian. Like, that's not what's going to happen with this. So you know for sure that you're going to have to apply your Christian worldview to what you're looking at. Now, there are going to be things from the Old Testament and from the New Testament, from all of Scripture, about hospitality. That's a big theme. There's also a theme of the few or the one being sacrificed for the good of the many. That's in there. There's also like the golden rule kind of a thing. Here they refer to it as Zeus's rule. And the thing to be careful about is sometimes certain atheist apologists, let's say, they will say, well, just because, like, they will look at that and say, see, that's Christianity just stole all that stuff from other places because this is contemporary with the Old Testament. That's not going to be necessarily the case. So don't fall into that trap. And also, make sure you have your dukes up. There are things you can apply what you know from Scripture to what you're looking at. There are lessons you can learn from it by being in interaction with it. So I think that it's something worth looking at. And even like people like I don't know, Basil the Great and, Augustine, who are much closer than we are to that pagan world, they would say stuff like, you need to be like a honeybee. You go, you get the nectar, you leave the flower petals behind. So don't eat the lotus flowers, and make sure you're on your guard. But if you have an interest in watching it, you may enjoy it. There are different things. That movie, The Return, I found very enjoyable. That might be worth looking at. Or if people are just wanting to go back and look at that, maybe check out an audiobook or pick up a copy of one of the translations of the Odyssey.
Pastor Ted Giese has a bachelor's degree in fine arts. He is pastor of Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. He teaches a course for Concordia Lutheran Theological Seminary called A Lutheran Approach to Art, Media, and Film. Ted, thanks.
Thank you.
We will talk about artificial intelligence with Noso Mogor, author of a column for the Lutheran Witness magazine entitled, What is AI? Next. What do Jesus and Paul teach about marriage, divorce, unchastity, and desertion? The Issues Etc. book of the month for July is Divorce and Remarriage, Ecclesiastical Discernment and Pastoral Care. This new resource is published by Concordia Publishing House. Their phone number, 1-800-325-3040. You can learn more about divorce and remarriage at issuesetc.org. Divorce and Remarriage by Dr. Ben Mays. The Issues Etc. book of the month for July.
Does this sound like your church budget process at the end of the year? You get last year's budget and go through with a committee line by line, maybe what we should spend next year. Maybe you have a prayer. But where's the Word of God in this process? When do the people hear what the small catechism says about giving and why we do it? Contact us at LCMS Stewardship so that we can help you fix this process, put the Word of God first, and put your congregation on a good footing. lcms.org/stewardship.
I'm Dr. Russell Dawn, president of Concordia University Chicago, reminding you about the Prepared to Serve Church Professional Guarantee. Any new student in one of CUC's 6 church work programs will pay no more than $5,000 in annual tuition and required fees, guaranteed. Prepared to Serve is a donor-funded initiative. Support future church work students by becoming a funding partner at cuchicago.edu/preparedtoserve. Concordia University Chicago. With Christ at the center, we stand tall for the church.
Criticism.
Thank God that it's 5:01 and the show is over.
Commendation.
I am not a Lutheran, but I regularly listen to Issues, etc., and thank you for putting this on the air.
Conundrum.
A Catholic friend has come to our LCMS church, and he said, "Why do you say very God, a very God?" And I couldn't think of a good answer.
The Issues Etc. comment line, 618-223-8382.
We're supported by listeners like you. You're listening to Issues Etc.
Issues Etc. guest Dr. Ben Mays of Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Here's what Martin Luther says about the pastoral office. My pastor is practicing the virtue that increases God's kingdom, fills heaven with saints, plunders hell, robs the devil, wards off death, represses sin, preserves peace and unity, and plants all kinds of virtue in the people. In a word, he is making a new world. He builds not a poor temporary house, but an eternal and beautiful paradise in which God himself is glad to dwell. We are calling good men to step up. Come to Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Learn more about studying for the vocation of pastor at ctsfw.edu or call 1-800-481-2155. Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.